Chapter 2, Spyalarak Sibir Nochair, Stranglers of the Dragon's Necks, Part 2. The imperial palace had sundry bathing rooms. 36 of them were for the empress's use, and the empire's sovereign could bathe in whichever she liked every day. Perhaps one of their ancestors thought that if the role of emperor didn't come with privileges like that, nobody would ever willingly serve. This bathing room was one of the ones reserved for the empress, and it was named Verspec, White Camellia. Other people could use it if they had the empress's imperial sanction. Receiving that sanction and bathing here would be the highest of honors to most Ovs, but not to Lafier. Her grandmother was already on the throne by the time she was born. The act a servant vassal would call requesting imperial sanction was, to a young Lafier, called pestering grandma. She was so used to receiving imperial sanction that she'd had no opportunity to feel the sheer weight behind it. To Lafier, the imperial sanction needed to use the bathing rooms wasn't even really the result of pestering. She simply used whichever bathing room she wanted to whenever she was at the imperial palace. Naturally, the empress knew, but Lafier had never been chided for it. She only started bothering to obtain formal sanction after growing up. This sanction, of course, was nothing more than a formality for imperials. All it really took was a word with a chamberlain about which bathing room they wished to use. Those requests were sometimes declined on rare occasions, but most of the time they were accepted without delay. This time around, not even that much was needed. A chamberlain relayed to her the empress's will: bathe at the bathing room of your choice. Lafier was hit by a certain nostalgia. She hadn't used an imperial palace bathing room recently, but when she was little, she took a shine to this one, White Camellia. She entered with her grandmother, but the empress appeared not to like this one all that much. Upon Lafier insisting on using White Camellia, her grandmother said, in mock consternation, "But you are the Viscountess of the Land of Roses." This was code for wanting to go to the bathing room named Par Rose instead. Rose was a beautiful bathing room. Much as the name implied, splendid flowers covered the walls and ceiling, roses of diverse breeds in a continually shifting bouquet of colors. But the real draw to Rose was not the colors, but the aroma. The water vapor was loaded with quite the heady fragrance. Sadly, Lafier was not partial to the smells of Rose. In the end, the empress opted for White Camellia, just as her granddaughter wanted. The last time Lafier used White Camellia was before she was given the assault ship Bosroer to captain. She hadn't been in any of the imperial palace's bathing rooms since then, and by extension, she had stopped bathing with her grandmother. The doors to White Camellia opened. Beyond those doors, steam rose up against the surface's silver pattern. In the world according to a young Lafier's eyes, this was the only place it ever snowed. Even now, she knew it snowed on land worlds on an intellectual level, but she had never experienced natural snowfall, nor did it seem likely she ever would. But thanks to this bathing room, she knew the sensation of snow melting on her skin. She stepped inside and sank to her ankles in the snow, the cold biting at her bare feet. The water was red and gave off a faintly sweet scent. She steeped herself in the hot water, and warmth started slowly penetrating to her core. Eventually, she felt flushed from the heat. "Make it snow," ordered Lafier. Meager white crystals began precipitating heavily. For a brief spell, she watched the white snow melt in the red water. She felt guilty. This was no time to be kicking back. Yet she couldn't be raising a panicked commotion either. She closed her eyes and faced up as she enjoyed the contrast between the warmth her body was submerged in and the cold on her head. "So you went and made it snow too." Without her circlet, her Frocraw's spatiosensory perception wasn't online. Lafier opened her eyes. Llamas was there, peering. "It has been too long, Your Majesty." Greeting the Empress while submerged in a hot bath was not a privilege afforded to every imperial. In fact, even as her granddaughter, it wouldn't be surprising if she was scolded for being a tad impolite. Yet llamas did not take her to task. "But you are the Viscountess of the Land of Roses," she lamented, before immersing herself. "No matter. This bathing room, it's—" Lafier waited for llamas to finish that sentence, but her grandmother said no more. Lafier could easily guess what the Empress would have said, though. The capital would fall. Lokfakar. The Unfelled. In other words, Leifir would be the last to ever use this bathing room. This might even be the last time she ever indulged in such a bath at all. The fight to defend the capital would be tough, and all the more so now that the Empress, the highest commander, was resigned to defeat. Leifir would participate in the battle as well. The specter of death hung over all battles, but this time the chances were particularly high. Leifir never steeled herself for death when facing a battle. She didn't need to, she had already made her peace long ago, so she didn't need to muster the resolve before every battle. But this time, she did steel herself anew. And she felt entitled to choose the bathing room she would use at what could be the end of her life. The Empress issued the young Imperial an order. "We hereby dismiss you from your current post." "Will you enroll me in the Watchguards?" asked Leifir. She'd had every intention of fighting as a member of Trampleblitz Squadron 1, but she preferred being assigned to the Watchguard fleet. "No," said Lamas, shaking her head. "We are relieving you from your post as ship commander. But you will still belong to your squadron." Perhaps she would be ushered into the bridge of the Empress's seat ship. She didn't quite understand this business about staying with Trampleblitz Squadron 1, but maybe this meant she would be given a role as a communications star pilot. Either way, her core affiliation didn't matter nearly as much as her position. "Will the Flickob be taken away?" she asked on a hunch. The Imperial decree addressed to Vice Hecto Commander Avriel had instructed her to take the crew of the Flickob along. After consulting with Kilo Commander Ados Ryua, the Flickob would be given to Sabash for the time being. If its crew didn't return, it would need the other ships of the squadron to send crew members little by little in order to operate it. Otherwise, it would have to be abandoned. The rationale behind her orders wasn't written in the message, but she could infer. She would be given a new ship. If they had any plans for the Flickob, they would issue orders such that it was brought to harbor at the Ruber, Imperial Palace spaceport. Leifir had just been getting a feel for the Flickob. That was why she wanted to continue fighting as a Sopaic Sarer, raid ship commander. But there were no ifs, ands, or buts when it came to an Imperial decree. "Will they give me some important role?" she wondered. "You will be commanding a different ship," said the Empress, just as Leifir had been expecting. "Which ship will I be receiving?" Though she still had the crew she was familiar with, she couldn't say she was confident she would be able to command a whole new ship to perfection. The Gothnosh Draider will do. It was customary for the Emperor's seat ship to be a state-of-the-art patrol ship named the Gothnosh. Whenever a new Gothnosh was born, the old seat ship would usually be called the Gothnosh Mura, former Gothnosh. In order to avoid confusion, a Gothnosh Mura was disposed of whenever a new Gothnosh Mura came about. This was disposal in name only. It was rare for it to become decommissioned or scrapped. It was typically lent to a grandee and renamed. The Segnok of the Nimiek Latepan, Archducal House of Latepan, and the Kafurek of the Nimiek Separer, Archducal House of Separer, were both once named the Gothnosh and were equipped with Rugahor, throne bridges. Still others were preserved in functional condition as memorial ships. The Gothnosh Draider was one of them and had been kept around in commemoration of the victory of the Shishine campaign. "But grandmother," said Leifir, her voice tinged with protest, "can the Gothnosh Draider fight?" A century had passed since the Shishine campaign, and that meant that at least that much time had passed since Gothnosh Draider's construction. It was an H-class patrol ship, but all other H-class ships had been retired long ago. Its armaments were outdated, and more saliently, most of them had been removed. "It can fight," asserted the Empress. "Through it, you can wage an important battle you would not be able to were you not an Imperial." While Leifir's father had pulled the wool over her eyes many a time, her grandmother had always been someone in whom she could place her trust. And yet the royal princess couldn't help but be on guard. "What must I do?" she asked. "Deliver the Rubasar, imperial treasures, of the Hall of Remembrance to Dusanyu." There were 3 imperial treasures. 2 of them were the Jade Throne and the Imperial Command Baton, which were with the Empress. The third was centuries old and stood in the Hall of Remembrance, which was also in the Imperial Palace and not too far from Leifir's current location. The hundreds of pillars there were engraved with the names of the people who had died for the Empire, with no distinction by social status. To the era religious of, this hall was the closest they came to the concept of sacred. They were the Death Freiträger, pillars of praises, and they were collectively the third imperial treasures. That's... Leifir found herself on her feet. I intended to fight to protect Lokfakar. Leifir understood that hers was an important mission. The names engraved stood as a record. Digital records could easily be duplicated, and there actually were a number of spares and copies. There was no doubt it was possible to engrave all of the names on new stone. But they could never transfer the vast quantity of tears shed over these pillars. Wherever the new Hall of Remembrance was to be located, the pillars that stood there ought to be the ones standing in the Imperial Palace. Otherwise, why bother with Imperial treasures? The pillars of praises were ultimately just information recorded by primitive means, and all that was recorded was names. But there was enough information in the electronically recorded name register to be able to write a critical biography on each and every one of them. Regardless, Leifir couldn't bring herself to feel too pleased about receiving this mission. Do not be so selfish. We cannot imagine the war hinging on the presence of your ship. That is true, but why am I the one who must carry the treasures? You are the most senior Bosnal Gama, active-duty soldier, among the Imperials currently in the capital. The most senior? I'm to be removed from the capital's defense for that. That isn't it, said the Empress, nonplussed. The defense of the capital was never your mission to begin with. Apart from those belonging to the Watchguard fleet, all active-duty soldiers must be involved in the emergency relocation. Even if you were not the most senior, you would not be allowed to mobilize alongside the Watchguard fleet or to stay in the capital. You would have been given the mission to escort the evacuees, or some other appropriate mission. Are you telling me to bear it because the only other missions you can give me are even more trifling? Do not disappoint us any further, Leifir, she said sternly. There are no trifling missions in the capital now. Moreover, you are laboring under a misunderstanding. It is not the capital we must protect. Do you not understand even that much? Under the Empress's stare, Leifir was dumbfounded. I apologize, I don't know what you mean. It is the Empire's future that we must protect. To our people, the Empire is like their favorite toy. If we lost it now, our descendants would resent us. That is why we must maintain what the Empire has accumulated over time for posterity. And we are buying the time we need for your crew to accomplish its duty, which is our primary concern. We are merely playing a supporting role to assist you. Is such assistance not the mission of us inexperienced young soldiers? She protested, half reflexively. Your Majesty, you are a presence the Empire does not wish to lose. But she clammed up when she noticed the look on her grandmother's face. The Empress was smiling her way. Lamhirkfina, our cute little Leifir. Lamas combed her granddaughter's bluish-black hair with a hand. If you know yourself to be inexperienced, then do not try to cajole us. Yes, grandmother. Leifir hung her head, somewhat ashamedly. The post was decided long ago. It can no longer be changed. The Watchguard fleet and the Capital Defense Platoon will buy time and allow that many more people to flee to the interim capital. Changing posts now would simply cause unnecessary confusion. We have already made an unforgivable mistake as Empress, and we do not intend to make another. But we shall brook no rebuttals. But the Empress's eyes were calm. We did not call you here for a debate. And giving you your mission was incidental. Then why did you call me here? For personal reasons, said Lamas. Neither your father nor your aunt nor your brother nor your cousins are in Lokfakar. You are our only blood relative within reach. You called me here for that? Leifir was a bit disappointed. Are you unhappy with our calling you here to bid family farewell? No. I am most pleased, grandmother, she said from the heart. We're glad, nodded Lamas. Now, there isn't much time. Let's talk. Yes. Shall we recount to you your father's weak point? Yes, please. By the way, Royal Princess, said the Empress, visibly bothered. What is it? Do you wish for the snow to continue? No, Leifir smiled and stopped the snowfall. Man, even during a crisis like this, they've got chamberlains manning the Imperial Palace's transporters, mused the Count of Hyde, Lean Sion Roke Jeant. Transporters were typically operated by their users, and all it amounted to was inputting the destination. Even a child could do it. Beyond that, the user could issue secondary commands, like nice and easy or hurry it up. Most users were satisfied with the standard speed. However, sometimes hosts would go through the trouble of assigning operators to the transporters as a show of either hospitality or power. As for the Imperial Palace, there was another motive behind it: surveillance. It wasn't as though anyone at the Imperial Palace was there uninvited, but even for those who had a legitimate reason to visit, they were only allowed to go to an extremely limited number of places. Though they'd taken pains to make sure it wasn't readily apparent, Jint didn't doubt the transporter operator chamberlains were armed. "Where do you wish to go, sir?" asked the chamberlain. Judging by her chestnut hair, she hailed from a land world too, yet her Baranu was native speaker level. Ovgenes were not required to be a chamberlain, but one did have to be pure of in mind and soul. "Take me to the spaceport." Jint was the clerk of the raid ship Flickob, but he'd come to the Imperial Palace as the Count of Hyde. Now that his business as the Count of Hyde was over, he had to return to the Flickob. As Jint lacked a genetic Ovsfrosh spatiosensory organ, he needed to be sent there by someone. He'd been unsure whether he'd be able to catch a flight during this state of emergency, but as luck would have it, he had reason to believe Liwing Nombok, who had brought him here to begin with, was still waiting at the Imperial Palace spaceport. And he knew Nombok would want to be back on the ship as soon as possible. In fact, he was probably fairly ticked off. Jint had to hurry, not least in order to keep Nombok from cracking. The only problem was the man standing beside him. Samson was no longer enlisted in the Star Forces. He was now a servant vassal of the House of Hyde and, by extension, of Jint himself. Jint glanced at him. "There's no need to worry, good sir," said Samson, shrugging. "I'm a grown man, so I can choose my own path in life." But Jint couldn't just abandon a vassal. Furthermore, he had a feeling that if they parted ways now, he'd never see Samson again. "Please get on. We can talk on our way over." "Your wish is my command," Samson grinned, before mounting the transporter. "That's what you were aiming for from the start, wasn't it?" said Jint. But whatever could you mean?" said Samson, playing dumb. "I know full well that whenever you talk all formal like that, you're poking fun at me." "You're not necessarily the only person I do that to," he said, reverting to his normal mode of speech. "That's good." The transporter took off. "Oh, to know I've pleased mine lord. Please give it a rest already," said Jint, understandably fed up. "You should learn to take it in stride. I mean, you are a noble. If you can't let a little butt kissing slide, you're gonna have a bad time. You're not kissing my butt. You're just having fun." "Oh, come on, it's nothing to get upset over." "True," nodded Jint. There were a myriad of pressing problems that needed to be dealt with. Number one on that list was what to do about Samson. If Jint left him behind, Samson would try to manage on his own, but he felt responsible for him as his lord. Just then, Samson's wrist gear started playing a solemn tune. Samson took a look and nodded to himself. "Huh. I got an invitation from the Star Forces." "What did you say?" "They're calling up all the members of the First Reserve. Though it seems I'm not obligated to accept. I can take it or leave it." "I see. It had always been a possibility. They even decided on a post for me." "What would you be doing?" "It looks as though the Semfair needs an inspector supervisor." "What kind of ship is that?" "It doesn't sound like the name of a warship." "Hold on a sec." Samson furrowed his brow. "Well now. Seems like it's a decommissioned passenger ship. So both the people and the ship are back on active duty." "What's its mission?" "Evacuating the Imperial Palace." "Damn. Not too happy, huh?" This puzzled Jint. Jint took pride in the fact he had learned how to comport himself as an imperial noble, but he was aware that the foundation of his psyche was constructed on the land worlds of Martinu and Delktu. From the viewpoint of those ingrained values, assisting evacuees from the Imperial Palace seemed a chivalrous and meritorious deed. Of course, he didn't know how much stock Samson put in such chivalry. The man adhered to the values of his own homeland world, and even prided himself on how he hadn't given himself over entirely to our values. And Jint knew precious little about Samson's homeworld. He knew it was called Midgrat in Samson's native tongue and Dakfort in Baranu. Samson loved going down memory lane regarding his homeworld, but as far as Jint could tell, his tall tales were embellished to hell and back, making them less than credible. "It's the cats," Samson muttered in reply. "Huh. I know those Empire people are gonna have me evacuate the cats." "No way. Yes way, said Samson, convinced. Who else would there be to evacuate? It's not like Imperials can skip town. But the underage Imperials, the ones who haven't even gone to academy yet, they'll have to evacuate, won't they? Are there any Imperials at this here Imperial Palace? Samson asked. Jint cast a glance at the Chamberlain, whose back was facing them. Samson had been speaking about Imperials in quite impolite terms. But she pretended not to have overheard. Well, you have a point. Given that Imperials were raised at their respective royal palaces before enrolling in an academy, they weren't likely to be here. Sure do. There won't be any underage bluebloods unable to join the fray. High-ranking officials lived in the Imperial Palace, and some of them headed their households here. There had to be some young children among them. Moreover, even some of the adults had no reason to linger in the capital, namely, the ones with no military experience. The Empire wasn't so irrational as to force such people to stay when there was no point. In any case, said Samson, I've been directed to at least board the Samfair as a passenger if I don't intend to return to military service. And what if you refuse to board at all? Asked Jint. Beats me. I'm sure the Ovsi falling alongside the Imperial Palace as a great honor. Which is why I don't see them letting me do so. Then I suppose they'd tie you up and toss you aboard. If I were in charge, I'd just shoot anybody who acted that self-serving. Who can be bothered tying people up? I see. I guess that way is more of like. Then you have no choice but to pick between those two options. I'd like to beg off giving cats a ride, or getting a ride alongside a bunch of cats, for that matter. Is that not selfishness on your part? Don't fret. I have no intention of dying just yet. I may be the kind of petty-minded guy that never entertains the twaddle of self-serving lumps, but I definitely want Imperial nobles to be more magnanimous than me. That sounds self-serving to me, thought Jint. So, what are you gonna do? I'm keen to see what it's like to handle a raid ship. What? Man, you're dense. Just put me on your ship already. It's not my ship, and you know that. Jint fully understood that wasn't the real issue, but he said that in order to buy himself some time to think. Why sweat the small stuff? Don't sweat the small stuff, he says. And you call yourself a mechanics branch guy, said Jint, feigning shock. He wasn't actually shocked, of course, he'd known Samson for some time now. Nothing he said shocked him anymore. Laddie, when you spend all your time fussing over machines, you stop caring about being so sensitive around humans. Well, at any rate, it's not my decision to make. Besides, the Flickob has an inspector supervisor already. You wouldn't have any work to do. I don't mind being the inspector supervisor's assistant. I'm none too familiar with the systems on a raid ship, so in these circumstances, I can't ask for too much. He doesn't want to manage a raid ship, he just wants to be with me. It did feel gratifying. I'll obtain the ship commander's permission. Hurry. If she doesn't reply in time, they're gonna force me on some passenger register. How long do we have? About 7 or so minutes. Then I've really gotta hurry. Jin activated his wrist gear and called Lafier. He got a response immediately. Jint, is that you? I'm sorry, but I'm hung up. If you've something to say, say it. Jint was slightly disappointed. It wasn't Lafier herself speaking, it was the CompuCrystals in her wrist gear. It's urgent, said Jint. Yet I still cannot answer, replied the CompuCrystals, imitating her obstinately. No recourse now. Okay. I have a request regarding the crew. I'd like you to reply when you have a moment. With that, he ended the transmission. So, what now? Said Samson. For the time being, please just hop on with me. Jint could do at least that much under his own authority. While he would ultimately need his ship commander's approval, under time of emergency stipulations, he could act first and report later. As a passenger, asked Samson, disgruntled. Only for the time being. All right, fine. I'll turn down the Samfair thing. You sure about that? Teased Jint. If you're going to be a passenger either way, wouldn't the Samfair be better? I mean, it is a passenger ship. But it's old. I like newer ships. I see. In that case, just give me a moment. Can't wait too long, said Samson. I know. Jint contacted Nombak. He answered right away. Yes, Quartermaster Vanguard? You're still at the spaceport, right? The name of the person on the other end was displayed on his wrist gear, but not their current location. And he needed to ask because, in this time of emergency, it was possible Nombok had received fresh new orders. Yes, I am. Are you unaware, sir? Unaware of what? It isn't just me here. The crew of the Flickob is waiting at the Imperial Palace spaceport. Jint and Samson looked at each other. Why? I'm not sure, Vanguard. Only the ship commander knows. Huh, all right then. What is she up to? Right now, she's talking to Deca Commander Ekrua. Okay, envy spiked inside him, a shameful impulse. He didn't know the details, but clearly, Leifier and the gang had been given a new mission. And it made all the sense in the world that Leifier would talk to her vice commander first. There was nothing to be envious over. The ship commander is there? No, sir. She and the Deca commander are talking via Riskier. Jint paused to think. The situation was fluid, and at least for now, returning to the Flickob was no longer an option. There were no other questions to pelt Nombok with. Roger, said Jint. I'm dropping the call. Call me when you know more. Understood, Vanguard, sir. So, what's that mean for me? Said Samson, though his tone was calm and collected. Let's just meet back up with the others for now. It wouldn't be meeting back up for me just then, a call. It was Leifier, Jint. Hiya. Jint felt like a desert wanderer who'd just found an oasis. Head for the Hall of Remembrance at once. Sure, but why, though? He asked, taken aback by the unexpected command. I am headed there as well. I'll fill you in person. Okay. See you at the hall. Jint hastened to reply, lest she drop the call on him. Hold on a sec. What? She said, her tone less than pleased. She must be busy. I've got Mr. Samson with me, he said, as concisely as he could. You remember him, right? He was with us on the Boss Roar. Yes, I remember him. Are you mocking me? Must you be like him? Him. Now your memory's in question. I speak of Sawbash. I don't know any other Sawbash besides the squadron's senior staff officer, he said, playing dumb. Did Mr. Sawbash say or do something? Never mind. In any case, I remember Samson. Excellent, said Jint, smiling wryly. Mr. Samson says he wants to come with us. Wait a moment. The second the transmission cut out, Samson's wrist gear rang. It's a pleasure to hear from you again, Ship Commander, said Samson. Or should I call you Your Highness? Call me whatever you like. I am busy, Samson Borg Tyresser. I beg your pardon. He hesitated for a moment. Your Highness. Can you manage the systems on an H-class patrol ship? An old ship, you say, said Samson, bewildered. I know it's old. Can you do it? I did training drills back when I was a Danagak cadet. I think I can do it, but I would have to constantly refer back to the manuals for a brief period, if you would allow it. I'll allow it. Now prepare the manuals and head for the spaceport. There you will find a woman named Grinchia. She will be your direct superior for the time being. Roger that, Your Highness, Ship Commander. Very good. The call dropped. Samson gave Jint a raised eyebrow. I believe I said I wanted to try handling the systems of a state-of-the-art raid ship, not give my cadet-era training a run-through. Then you'll be going to the Semfair, I'm guessing? It would certainly be a more comfortable ride, and it could even be a newer model. I'll tell the ship commander. Jint knew Samson wasn't seriously protesting. Samson shrugged before going about the necessary procedures to decline embarkation on the Semfair. Once that was done, he opened a file that seemed to be the aforementioned manuals through his wrist gear and began brushing up. Jint wondered whether Leifier would call him again, but his wrist gear wasn't ringing. He knew what they needed to do, but he felt a touch desolate all the same. Excuse me, Jint addressed the Chamberlain. Our destination has changed. Also, could you arrange for another transporter? The Hall of Remembrance was both the most sacred and the most publicly accessible place in the Imperial Palace. The descendants of the people whose names were inscribed in the pillars came to visit on a routine basis. And ever since the war broke out, mourners came in continuous droves to remember the dead. It would be untoward to deny access to the bereaved. For security reasons, many had floated the idea of moving the hall outside of the Imperial Palace. Some even opined that not only was there no need for the hall to be in the palace, but also that should it be placed in some remote area, the hall's esteem would only increase. Yet as of that moment in time, the hall was still inside the Imperial Palace. The hall had an attached garden park so visitors could take a rest. When the transporter rolled into that garden, they were met with the fragrance of grass and soil. The blanket of green sported gentle slopes and gazebos here and there. Landworlders might not realize it, but up in space, a park like this was the height of luxury. It was proof that the Empire had the utmost respect for those who had given their lives for its sake, as well as for the mourners they'd left behind. The park's paths were paved in stone, just wide enough for transporters to be able to pass each other by. It was down one of those paths that their transporter traveled. As one might expect, there were no mourners to be seen, but there were a few figures at one of the gazebos, and none of them were seated. Jint spotted Lafier in her military uniform at the center of the group. "Could you take me there?" asked Jint, pointing. "Understood," said the chamberlain operating the transporter. The gazebo was on a small hill. The stone-paved road didn't go there. It was instead accessible via a log staircase. The transporter came to a stop at the bottom of the staircase. "May I stop us here?" asked the chamberlain. "Yes, of course. Thank you very much." Jint stepped off. The people around Lafier were not soldiers, or at least, not active-duty ones. He didn't recognize any of them. Once he climbed the stairs, Lafier noticed him there. "Jint, you're here." "Yes, ma'am." Jint saluted. "I see you don't have your uniform on," she said, eyes reproving. It was then he realized he still had on his grandee clothing. Plus, he had on not his simple military-issue circlet, but the splendorous circlet fit for a count. "I didn't have time to change," said Jint. "Well, whatever. We have work to do." "Yep." "Which is?" "We've been assigned to a new ship. You are to take command over the budget branch officers." "Roger that." Managing the food, daily necessities, medical supplies, and air and water purification equipment was the job of the budget branch, which Jint, the ship's clerk, was the head of. Normally, his work tasks were relatively uncomplicated. It basically involved restocking whatever was in short supply whenever they entered a harbor. But now that they were on a new ship, he had his work cut out for him. First, he had to figure out how many crew members they had. Then he had to calculate the loading capacity for each item based on the contents of their mission and the number of days they'd be voyaging, all, needless to say, while keeping those shackles known as the budget in mind. He also needed to know the current status of all of the life support apparatuses. Boy, am I going to be busy. Jint got a little dizzy at the thought. Though he'd gotten plenty of experience aboard the Bossrohr and the Flickob, he had extremely little time to spare. "We also have some cargo to carry," said Lafier. "Huh? How much?" "That is currently being looked into." Cargo was also the province of the budget branch. Yet whether it be an assault ship or a raid ship, it was rare to load just cargo. Raid ships carried large amounts of nuclear fusion shells, though those were under the gunner's jurisdiction and not for the clerk to worry about. "What the heck is Goy?" started Jint. "I'm busy." She indicated a man, one of the people standing nearby. "Ask this man what you need to ask." Though the man was wearing civilian clothes, he bore the circlet of a noble. The crest carved in said circlet was adorned with a mythical lion-headed carp. "Roger that." Lafier conversed about something or other with the other chamberlains. Jint tried to formally introduce himself to the noble. "That won't be necessary," said the noble. "I know you are the Count of Hyde. I am Noble Prince Amum Gakr Gakrak, the Eroshiak, administrator, of the Hall of Remembrance. Now then, shall we get to business?" "No objections here." Jint was relieved they weren't going through all the pleasantries. He may have acquired the proper comportment of a noble, which was to say he was better than he used to be, but he still wasn't accustomed to being in that position. He got especially nervous anytime cordiality was required of him. "I don't mind if we call a transporter, but would you care for a walk?" suggested Urf. "I was just thinking I don't get enough exercise," agreed Jint. "But do we have enough time?" "We don't have the time to dawdle and relax, but I do need to take time out to explain things. Besides, it will take time for the machines to be prepared." "The machines?" "I intend to tell you about them as well." They walked down the slope opposite the staircase, Urf explaining to Jint about their cargo in simple terms. "Our cargo is Imperial treasures." Jint was about to ask what the Imperial treasures were, but stopped himself in the nick of time. Urf didn't doubt that Jint knew what they were. If Jint asked now, Urf would be more than disappointed in him. Jint was sure Urf would demand Jint be removed from his post. If he found himself tossed in the cabin of the Semfair, he would be quite a sorry sight to see. "Forgive me. There's something I'd like to double-check. Would that be okay?" said Jint, checking his wrist gear for the info he needed under that pretext. He inferred with some relief that the imperial treasures Urf was referring to were the pillars of praises that populated the Hall of Remembrance. The Jade Throne and the Imperial Command Baton were also imperial treasures, but they'd hardly need to be brought here first if it had been their mission to carry them away. Then he realized this was no time to be relieved. Because there were a lot of pillars, and they were all in order of magnitude bigger than either the throne or the baton. Furthermore, he was perplexed. On an intellectual level, he understood that the Av held the pillars of praises as sacred, but as he had studied Av culture later in life, he didn't quite know how they were supposed to be handled. "Is some kind of special ceremony needed to move them?" asked Jint. He figured he'd be forgiven for not knowing that, after all, there was no way all that many Avs by birth had experienced moving the pillars of praises themselves. "No. You just need to carry them without damaging them." "And are we the ones who will have to carry them onto the ship?" "You don't need to worry about that, Count," said Urf. "We will do that for you. Please decide how to store them in the Gofnosh Drader's mine deck." Gofnosh Drader. So that was the name of the ship he'd be on. "I hear it's an old-style patrol ship?" "That is correct." "Do we have to make space for mines too?" "No. While I'm not in charge of armaments, it appears Her Majesty wishes for the Imperial treasures to be loaded in the mine deck," he replied calmly. "Naturally, however, if you think of a more fitting place to put them, I defer to your expertise." Other concerns aside, at least he knew he would have space to work with. But that, he realized, was obvious. A decommissioned patrol ship must have been selected for the task precisely because of its loading capacity. Needless to say, he couldn't be too relieved. Not under this deluge of causes for concern. Cylindrical stone blocks weren't usually required for combat navigation. Accounting for them was an extra task, so to speak. And no matter how easy an extra task proved, it was another straw on his back. He was eager to get the arrangements for this side task over with so he could set about his base tasks. A sakaki tree grove was located at the base of the hill. It looked like a dense patch of forest, but that was just an optical illusion, and the path sandwiched by trees terminated quickly. Beyond that path lay the Hall of Remembrance, which, in an abrupt shift in scenery, was blanketed by white sand. The pillars of praises stood in their hundreds, a crystal-clear creek flowing between them. Jin stopped in front of the creek, which was very shallow. If one didn't mind getting their shoes wet, they could cross it without issue. It wasn't very wide either, so one could leap over it if they did a run-up. But Jin searched for a bridge, which would definitely be the more graceful way to cross. Then he realized Urf was kneeling. Is he praying? He wondered. He'd never seen an Av make such a religious gesture. But as he stared, he saw Urf scoop the creek's water into his mouth. Do I do likewise? If Urf was doing so out of some religious drive, then imitating him would be poor form. Thankfully, Urf soon got back on his feet. It's just as I thought, cool and refreshing. If I may ask, said Jint, after mustering the courage. By all means, Urf smiled. Ever since I first visited this place when I was young, I've wanted to try tasting this water. But until now, I couldn't without being noticed. Oh, guess he doesn't mind if I notice. Forgive me my rudeness for doing it in front of you, Lanyu, he said, having picked up on Jin's sentiment. Today is my last chance, you see. I just couldn't resist any longer. I see. Jint flashed him a smile. Would you like a sip, Lan? No, I'm okay. If you say so, said Urf, cocking his head slightly as though wondering why. By the way, Lanyu, is this your first time visiting the Hall of Remembrance? Indeed it was. Yes, he nodded, red in the face. Upon one of the pillars before his eyes were inscribed the names of the first of crew he had ever met. The crew of the patrol ship Gosloth. In addition, some of the graduates in his year at the Quartermaster Academy had already been killed in action, too. He felt he should have visited at least once before now, but maybe because he still wasn't quite steeped down to the bone in of culture, it hadn't even occurred to him. More accurately, he'd forgotten the Hall of Remembrance even existed. Then I envy you, nodded Irf, expression vacant. Envy me? For what? You're looking upon this scenery with fresh eyes. I'm so embarrassed. How come? Said Irf, puzzled. Oh, it's nothing. Jint had thought Irf was joking, but now he realized Irf legitimately envied him from the bottom of his heart. And it seemed the fact he'd never visited the Hall of Remembrance was not considered a mark of shame, even for an of noble. Jint was relieved. Now then, if you'd come this way. Irf indicated to their left. There lay something akin to a bridge, exactly what Jint had been searching for earlier. More specifically, there were stepping stones placed in the creek. It was hard to make out the white stones against the white sand. Had he really put his mind to it, he might have noticed the ripples the stones were making, though. Irf called Jint over by a pillar. This was of course Jint's first time seeing one of the pillars of praises up close and in person. Go on, touch it, said Irf. I can. Please, go right ahead. Jint touched the surface of the imperial treasures with his palm. He could feel the chiseled names of the people who died long ago. As one might expect, it was a sobering sensation. He just didn't get why Irf had asked him to do it. Or, for that matter, why he'd brought him here to begin with. All Jint needed to do his job was numbers, the pillar's measurements, physical mass, quantity, and so on. Then he'd just check them against the volume of the mine deck and work out how to load the cargo. He glanced at Irf, uncertainty in his heart. Remember this feeling, said Irf. Huh? Etch this scenery into your soul. Jint was surprised. He never thought he'd hear such an unscientific sentence come out of an Ov's mouth. He also became worried they'd expect him to reconstruct the Hall of Remembrance. If that was just a personal misunderstanding, then that was no big deal, but there was a possibility that, unbeknownst to him, that had indeed been set as his mission. Jint was not a lazy person. He believed himself a man who'd completed the tasks laid out for him without once seriously complaining. But reconstructing a space the Ov held sacred was beyond his capacities. He hadn't even been an imperial citizen from birth, let alone an Ov. In fact, he'd only learned of the Ov's existence when he was 10 years old. Irf must have read Jint's wary expression. There's no grand purpose behind it, or anything like that. I just want at least one more person to remember the purity of this place. If it were possible, I'd have liked to bring every single person who has never seen this place, but that's far from feasible. I am glad I'm able to at least show you Lanyu. Oh, so that's what this is about. Jint slid his hand over the pillar's surface. I'll never forget. Ovs were usually pragmatists, but Jint had noticed long ago that there were times they turned awfully maudlin. And it seemed that in this place, that tendency was heightened. As an Ov himself, Jint was being asked to share that sappy sentimentality, which was something he could at least feign. It appears they've finally arrived, said Irf, voice dripping with sorrow. Jint turned to where Irf was looking. The heavy machinery had arrived, kicking up the white sand as it approached. A number of workers were walking all around the machines. Are those the carriers? Asked Jint. No, said Irf, his eyes full of pity regarding Jint's ignorance. They will package the pillars. Oh, I see. The names engraved in the pillars of praises were prone to wear and would disappear if not carefully preserved. The pillars needed packaging. Now then, shall we take our leave? They'll soon be taking the air out. Taking the air out? Yes. It's in order to make their work easier. The gravity will also be turned off. Upon closer inspection, while the workers' heads were uncovered, they were still wearing pressure suits. All right, let's hurry out of here, said Jint. For some reason or other, I'm not too fond of getting stuck in vacuums.